Hi guys, I'm Charlotte Stirling-Reed, the baby and child nutritionist, and I'm here today at Zebedees HQ to deliver a webinar all about mealtime environments and how we can help at nursery settings to make them much more enjoyable experiences for young children. So come and join me and hopefully you'll get lots of tips and lots of advice. My name is Charlotte Stirling-Reed. For those of you who don't know me, I am the baby and child nutritionist. I love to talk about feeding kids. I love to talk about weaning, fussy eating, all of the different stages of feeding young children. And it's an absolute passion of mine. And I'm going to show you during some of this presentation why I do what I do and why I talk about what I talk about. But of course, the main thing we're talking about today is mealtime environments at nursery and how you as a nursery setting can help to make the mealtime environment for young children as positive as it can be. And I know that is not necessarily a really easy task. So we're going to talk about the pitfalls. We're going to talk about how challenging it can be for members of staff at nursery settings at the same time. So bear with me, and we will also be doing, it's about 30 minutes of me giving you advice and information, and then we're going to do, at the end, we're going to do 10-15 minutes of Q&A. I'm going to have a Zebedees member of staff come join me, so if you've got any questions on Zebedees directly, you can have your questions answered by them as well. So hopefully it's going to be a really helpful session. I'll just check. Yeah, I think we will get started now if that's okay. So again, thank you all so much for joining. I'm Charlotte Stirling-Reed, and this is the Zebedees session all about mealtime environments at nursery. So just for those of you who don't know, a little bit of information about me. I am a qualified registered nutritionist, and I have a background I work for the NHS, and which is where I trained in infant, child, toddler and pregnancy nutrition. And it's really been where I direct all of my knowledge and advice because I just love it, and I think it's such an important area. And hopefully in a few slides' time, you'll see a little bit about why that is. I'm registered with the Association for Nutrition, and I'm also registered a part of Sense Nutritionist at the Guild of Health Writers. I've also got 3 books now to my name, so I've only got 1 on here, but I've got How to Wean Your Baby, How to Feed Your Toddler, and How to Feed Your Family. So 3 books that you can access and get lots of recipes in there if you're interested. And really importantly today, I am also Zebedees nutrition consultant. I've been working for Zebedees now for about 3 or 4 years, and I absolutely love them. Anyone who hears me talk about them will hear me say lots and lots of positive things, and that's because I spend a lot of time here and I see the hard work that goes into creating meals to be delivered to your nursery. So hopefully we'll hear a bit more about that later, but that's just a little bit about me. So just a little bit more about what I tend to do day to day. So I generally offer advice to nurseries. I do work with some brands like Zebedees, but I generally offer advice directly to parents. So this is via things like webinars, one-to-ones. I produce fact sheets, lots of free information on my blogs. I've got my books. I also run lots of courses as well. So lots and lots of ways that parents can get information from me about feeding their children. So if you're ever in doubt, you can go onto my website. You can share my resources with families as well. But of course, if you want to come directly for Zebedees, they're always so great at answering your questions. And if there's anything they're not sure about, they pass it on to me. So if you ever have a question about child nutrition or the food that's coming to nursery, do get in touch with us and we can help out. So before I move on to the exact thing that we're talking about today, mealtime environments, I just want to talk about this point because this is really the reason why I work in the field that I work. So we know from a lot of evidence around feeding young children that what happens in the early days and in the early years, and we often refer to this as the first 1,000 days of life, is incredibly important. Now, the first 1,000 days is the moment from conception right up until a child is around 2. But of course, that's just this kind of period that has been researched. Their nutrition, their health, everything matters thereafter as well. But we know that the early years really, really matter. Not just for the here and now, not just for helping children to have enough energy and grow well and develop well and be really healthy as young children, but actually as they get older too. And some of this research that's been conducted has found that actually the right nutrition during those early years can help save lives, so can save more than 1 million lives. It can reduce the risk of non-communicable diseases and chronic illnesses when children get older. It can improve educational attainment and IQ levels and earning potential of young children. And it can actually have an impact on a country's earnings too. So what we feed young children really matters. It really can have a huge impact on their lives, and not just their lives, but their families' lives, and the environment and the community around them, and also the country. So I know it sounds dramatic, but this is genuinely what research has shown. We know that food and nutrition that is given to young children really does matter in the long term. So I just wanted to get that point across initially to help us all see why I'm here today, why we're talking about it, and why the food that we're offering to young children matters. So moving on to what we're going to be talking about, which is very specifically about mealtime environments at nursery. What can we do at nursery? Why does it matter? And what do we even mean by the mealtime environment? So, answering that question first, what do we actually mean? So for many of you, you might be thinking about, a kitchen or exactly where we sit to eat our meal. And of course that matters. So the place that children eat in nursery is going to have an impact to how that mealtime environment is. But actually, the surroundings around them while they're eating matter too. What's on the walls, what everybody else is doing, whether it's hot or cold, whether there's lots of distracting toys around, that matters as well. Other things that matters is things like the interaction between children at mealtimes. Are they very quiet? Are they very noisy? Are there other people around? Are the staff eating somewhere else? This is all to do with the mealtime environment. So the way that we engage with those young children at mealtimes too. Also the structure of the mealtime. How fast paced is it? How slow paced is it? Is it a rush? Is our children allowed to just kind of leisurely eat and take as long as they want? All of that. And also the routine around those mealtimes. How are those mealtimes structured? Do we have a very specific breakfast, lunch, dinner, or is there less of a structure around those meals? The language we use, and that includes us as staff. What kind of language do we use when we're around that mealtime table? Are we talking a lot about the food? Are we pointing things out that maybe we don't like? How is that all happening around the mealtime environment? And also the ethos of the setting. And I think this is really important because this is something that we might not think about so much as being important for the mealtime environment. But as a setting, how do we engage young children in food? Do we try and get children involved at other levels? Do we read about food? Do we talk about food? Do we plant food? Do we go into the garden? Do we celebrate food in a variety of other ways? Because actually that can all make a big difference to, again, the child and the mealtime and what is actually happening at food times at the table. And how food is embedded as part of the learning journey of a nursery. And that might sound a little bit wacky, but I'm going to talk again a little bit more about what I mean when it comes to that. So when we talk about the mealtime environment, we're not just talking about the child at the table with a knife and fork and a plate and a table in front of them and that's it. There's so much more that can have an impact on that mealtime environment and help children to enjoy mealtimes a little bit more. So why am I talking to nursery staff? Why does it actually matter? And I think that as nursery staff, you're actually in such a fantastic place to be able to really, really support young children. And as we've seen, it really matters what young children eat. So if we, as members of the nursery, of people who work with young children, can understand the importance of this, then we can actually realise what a huge difference you can make to young children's lives, to their eating behaviour, to their patterns of eating, and also to the environment at nursery when they're eating their food too. So just as a couple of little statistics, 1.7 million children regularly eat at nursery. That's huge. So again, if all nursery settings knew and wanted to improve and make a real big difference to that eating environment, that's going to have a real knock-on effect. And also sometimes up to 90% of a child's meals are consumed within the nursery setting. So if a child is coming to your nursery and they're eating the majority of their meals with you, they're going to be picking up on the environment and the cues on how mealtimes feel like, about what food is offered in your setting, more perhaps than they are at home. So this is why this matters so much. And also, as nursery staff, you focus on education and helping children learning and helping with their journey, their growth, their development, everything. I mean, my daughter's at nursery and it's wonderful. I love all of the things she comes home with and the artwork she does and the creation she does. But also, food can be a real big part of that learning and that education too. So we can help educate children about eating, about building skills around eating, about accepting a wide variety of food, and also knowing why food is important. And that is also a massive part of children's learning. And if you think about how many times throughout the day children eat, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, drinks, it's actually a really big proportion of their time. So rather than just dismissing it as just, oh, food, it doesn't matter, we want to try and think of it as a real place where we can help educate them, help them learn, and help them enjoy food as well. It sets up, like I've already said, there's lots of play and learning that goes on in that nursery. So we can also have an extension to that by focusing on those meal times. Also, lots of children have lots of different eating styles. So it's important that we can help embrace that and have a look at different foods, different cultures. And also for us as staff as well, you're incredibly important role models at nursery. You might not feel like it, but actually you are those young children's role models when you're in the nursery. They're going to copy, they're going to emulate what you do. So what we do and how we act and how we talk about food as nursery staff can really, really make an impact too. In nursery, and most of the time I see lots of families say to me, oh, my little one eats really, really well at nursery, but not at home. And sometimes that's because you already have that structure in place. You've got clear away time, you have children who help out with a lot of the meal times, you have a nice clear structure of breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and then playtime kind of embedded throughout it. Quite often there's lack of distractions, quite often the staff are really involved in those meal times, and that can make a big difference. So you already have that structure in place to implement really positive meal times. So that's just a little bit about why it matters at nurseries. I also just want to talk about why meal times are important. Now, I've probably emphasised this quite a lot, so I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but of course they're important for getting nutrients in and making sure children get lots of energy throughout the day. They're growing and they're developing. They also have very small stomachs and often quite small appetites, but actually really high nutrient needs because they're growing, because they're developing, because their immune function is not at its absolute best just yet. So they need lots of that. But also mealtimes are important for taking a pause, having a bit of a rest, breaking up the day, stopping what they were doing the whole time, maybe giving their brain a little bit of a break too. But also learning skills. They might need to learn skills around eating that they'll just do automatically when they're feeding at mealtimes. Also eating with others. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit because it's one of my favourite things to talk about when it comes to mealtime environments. Also helping them to familiarise with a wide variety of foods. And that's one of the main things I love so much about Zebedees. Their variety on their menu is second to none. They have so much variety on their menu. And actually that, as a healthcare professional, as a nutritionist, that's what we want to encourage in young children. We want them to see and be witness to a wide variety of foods now, because actually that means that as they get older, they're more likely to accept a wide variety of foods. So Zebedees as a company are really, really great for that because they take a lot of the tough work out of it for you. So rather than having the same thing on the menu quite regularly, they make sure that menu is really diverse. And there are so many different, for example, vegetables in each dish that your little one is going to be exposed to, seeing, tasting on a really regular basis. And that can be so important. You also want children to understand the cultural importance of food, not just for them, but everyone. So around Christmas time, Easter time, birthdays, what does food mean? And how does that matter in the context of our day-to-day lives? And again, the nursery that my daughter is at, they are fantastic for this. There's so much they do around food. So whether it be building their own Christmas plates or whether it be growing herbs in their garden, they're constantly involving children in food and helping them to understand its relevance, not just at the mealtime. Also helping children to develop positive attitudes towards food. And this is really tricky because they're often going through phases where they are a little bit more picky, a little bit more fussy about the foods they're eating, which is really normal. But what we want is to be raising children who actually enjoy food so that they can accept a wider variety. And then, as I've already mentioned, celebrating foods throughout the year too. So what do less positive, let's say, meal times look like? So I often try and look at this and I often try and recommend, I work a lot with parents and I try and say to parents quite often, put yourself in children's shoes when you're at a mealtime and try and think about how you would feel if that was you. So for example, if you as an adult were sitting at a restaurant and somebody was sitting with you and they gave you a plate of something you didn't really recognise, but they said you could not leave the table until you finished that, or they were sitting there with a spoon trying to encourage you to put that spoon in your mouth and say, come on, open up, open up. If the environment was really loud and noisy, if other people around you were shouting or screaming, or if it was quite a tense atmosphere, you as an adult, how would you feel sitting in that environment? Would you want to go back there the next day? Because my instinct would be that you probably wouldn't. So if it's hectic, if it's time poor, really rushed, if it's loud, busy, cramped, or if you're even sitting on your own by yourself, if somebody else is leading that for you, so here it says staff-led, not child-led, if somebody else is telling you how much you should eat and how much you should want, is that going to put you off? If it's pressured, so you're saying you must eat this bit of the food, you must eat it, come on, I want you to eat it. Also, rewards and punishment for eating. If you get punished for not eating a part of that meal, again, as an adult, how would you feel? And also if there's multiple distractions going on and you don't really know where to focus, especially as young children who are really easily distracted. So sometimes I like to try and get us as adults to put ourselves in the environment and think, what would be nice for us? And I'm just going to jump forward one slide to talk about this, which is how can we turn that on its head? How can we make those environments more positive? So for example, pressured free meal times. And I will come back to talk about this because a lot of people might not understand what I mean. But we want to take the pressure off those meal times and try and allow children to be able to have their own autonomy around how much they eat. And it might sound counterintuitive, but actually in the long run, that's much more likely to help children to understand their own appetite and to listen to their own bodies, but also to actually end up eating more in the long run. Also eating with role models, socialising, eating with friends, eating with other nursery staff who they look up to. That can have a real impact on how children enjoy those meal times. Eating together, structures around meals, making that mealtime environment enjoyable, calm and distraction-free. And I talk a lot about this idea of making the mealtime enjoyable. And obviously that's going to vary from setting to setting how you're able to do that. But again, just try putting yourself in their shoes. How can we make this environment more pleasant for the children, and they're more likely to want to sit here? So having said all of this, and I promise I will go over some more tips and more thoughts around this, but having said all of this, I know that in a nursery setting, you have plenty of challenges when it comes to feeding young children. So, fussy eaters, that is one of the biggest challenges that I deal with every single day in my work. You're going to be dealing with that every day too. And you're not necessarily at home with them trying to help them out with that in other aspects. Negative mealtime environments, wasted food, which actually equals hungry kids. And hungry kids, we all know, is not an easy thing to deal with. Unwell, unhappy children, negative role models. So if you do have some extreme fussy eaters, if you do have some people, or maybe even some members of staff who will say, oh, that's yucky, that food's not nice, that's going to have a negative effect on that mealtime, and that can be a real challenge. Also, I've mentioned here the varying views of staff, and I think that's really important too, because we don't all have the same upbringing. We don't all have the same relationship with food. So when it comes to staff, we're all going to have different experiences and thoughts and feelings about food. But if we, for example, if I really didn't like stew and every time stew came in, I said, oh, that stew really smells, it can have a real impact on the children. So trying to avoid that kind of varying views of different stuff. Maybe some people think that we need to sit at a table and make sure those children finish their meals, and other people think maybe we need to be a bit more relaxed around meal times. That can be a real challenge in a setting, because who's right, who's wrong, how do we roll this out? And then, of course, a really key one, parental concerns. If you've got an anxious parent, or if you've got a parent who's worrying, or who's really, asking you multiple questions about the feeding environment, that can be really challenging for you to try and convey that message in a really non-judgmental way as well. So I do appreciate that in your setting you have multiple challenges to try and face. But there are many ways that we can try and make these mealtime environments more positive. And I'm going to move on now to talk a little bit about how. But first, I want to talk about two topics that I love talking about so much. And this is this word commensality and conviviality. These actually come from Mediterranean, when we talk about the Mediterranean diet, these are two really prominent parts of the Mediterranean diet. And the reason for that is because the Mediterranean diet isn't just about the foods that they eat. It is so much about the environment. And this includes the kind of social aspect of eating with friends and family and eating together. But also the social aspect of eating, including socialising around meal times. And again, it really makes a difference. If you think about, there's a reason why Christmas dinner is enjoyed by so many. And that's because we're often with friends, with family, we're all relaxed, we're all calm, we're all having a nice time, having conversations around meal. And that's the kind of thing we want to be thinking about every day when we're we're offering children food, trying to make that mealtime environment enjoyable and really sociable. Again, think about it. Is it a place you would like to eat in? Is it calm, comfortable, bright and enjoyable for young children? And again, going back to this, we need to be putting ourselves in those shoes. So how can we make those environments positive? I'm going to talk to you now about some of the tips that I often share, sometimes with parents, but sometimes with others, around how we can actually act on this. So it's all very well knowing that, children's nutrition is important and that we're a really great place to do it. And we know we've got lots of challenges, but what can we actually roll out to help make sure that in our nursery setting, the environment is really positive? So first of all, lots of nurturing around food. Again, coming back to that kind of learning aspect of it. So helping children to understand and enjoy food as part of their day. Having some mealtime rules, and I think that's really key. And as a nursery setting, again, you might want to consider writing out a policy and having some of these written down. So for example, children only eat at the table. They're not running around with food. It might be that children have to ask to get down. It might be that only one person helps with clear up. Whatever those rules are in your setting, try and have them quite strongly stipulated so that everybody is following them. And for example, maybe you might have a rule that at least one member of staff always eats with the children. You might have a rule that nobody around the table says yucky constantly. You might have a rule that no children are pressured to eat anything they don't want. So you can have a chat amongst yourselves about what these would be, but some mealtime rules can be really helpful at home and at nursery. But having said that, one of the things I am so strong to talk about is encouraging autonomy. Now, we know from a lot of research now that young children are actually very, very good at following their own appetite. They're very good at knowing how much they need, and us as adults or parents or staff looking after children, we are not very good predictors about how much children need. We might think, they probably should finish that plate, but actually that's not their own appetite. That's not their cues telling them, I'm full, I ate loads at my snack earlier, I don't want any more. So why do we often feel as adults, and many of us do it, why do we often feel as adults like we should be in charge of how much gets eaten? Because actually we can't tell how much is needed. So it is so important to try and let children be the dictators of their own appetite. And I know that's easier said than done, especially when you're at nursery with multiple children and lots of them maybe are having food that they're maybe less familiar with. So I think it's really important to try and allow them to have that autonomy, and it can take time, but actually they're more likely to be willing to eat if we do that. The more we put pressure on children to eat up, there's actually research that shows that the less likely they are to be willing to eat the food. So the more we pressure them, you really have to eat that potato, the less likely they'll want to eat it. And the same when they come back next time. So trying to avoid that pressure, allow them plenty of autonomy, get them involved in the mealtimes wherever you can. And I like to use this saying, so you decide when and what's on offer, and you let children decide how much they're going to eat. And if they're not eating much, they have multiple opportunities generally throughout the day to be able to eat different foods. Also, I've already mentioned, but mealtime patterns and a nice structure around mealtimes can really help. And allow explanations and discussions and conversation around food. If a child says, I don't want that, rather than just dismissing, no, you must eat it, it might be a conversation around what is it about that food that you're not so keen on, and allowing them to have conversations around this, and the same yourselves. Also being really supportive around them at mealtimes if they need a little bit of help with having some food. For example, if children aren't very well, or I've noticed very much with my daughter, when she comes home from nursery, she's very, very tired, and I often do have to help her a little bit with feeding, even though she's 3.5. And that's just because she's so tired, she's losing energy, and she doesn't have much energy left to help. So supporting them where we can. And one really key thing to stress is using positive language. Again, if somebody brought you out a meal and one of your friends who was sitting around the table with you said, oh, yuck, that's disgusting, I really don't like it. It might not stop you eating that meal, but it might have an impact on what you're feeling when you're actually eating it. So positive language around food and eating is really important around the table. And as staff, we can play a really, really great role in helping to keep that going. So a couple of more things. Also, explore food outside of meals. We're always thinking about the mealtime environment, but actually we can familiarise children with food by reading books about it, by growing it outside, by making, cutting out potatoes and making stampers for their Christmas cards, by painting with it, by counting with it. There are so many different ways you can engage children in food without having to get them to eat it. So I really would encourage to try and do that. And we know that as soon as children become familiar, they're more likely to accept that food. So sometimes, for example, at Zebedees, they have a rolling menu and it changes twice a year. So we have, a really great array of different foods, a really wide variety. But sometimes children might come across meals that they're not so familiar with. And it's very normal for them not to accept that right away. It's actually really, really normal. It's almost expected that if they're presented with something they're not familiar with, that they're not going to accept it. But that's why it's great that we have rolling menus, because they will be exposed to that meal again and again. And it might take a little bit of time, but without pressure, when that mealtime environment is really enjoyable for them, they are so much more likely to accept that food later on. So persistence, have patience with those meals, because sometimes they can just take a little bit of time. Again, role model, I've talked about that quite a lot. But also one thing I love is give them mealtimes tasks and jobs. I know every time when my daughter has been the snack helper or she's helped lay out the table for mealtimes, because they love it. They love being involved with it. So give them tasks, give them jobs to clear things around, give them a job to hand out bread rolls or whatever it is as part of the meal, because they love it. And again, it's familiarising, learning and part of their education around food. Allow them some play. And I think this is really key too. I totally appreciate how in a nursery setting, we don't want loads of mess around the mealtime, but try and allow them to explore and experiment. If some days they're eating a little bit more with their hands, that's okay. If some days they're squishing up their pasta or looking through it like it's a keyhole, that's okay. Allow a little bit of that play and exploring, because again, it's building familiarity with food. And as I said, sorry, I mentioned it on the other slide, but I've reiterated it here again because it's obviously a really key point. Positive language. Keep that language around foods positive. So just a little bit, I've only got a few more slides now, but just a little bit to kind of reiterate some of the points that I've made. Portion sizes for young children. Again, I like to talk about a mealtime being child-led. If it is adult-led, we're not really following their own cues. We might be overriding their actual natural appetites. We might be not listening. Maybe they have got a sore tummy or a headache and they just don't feel like eating. Maybe they had too much yesterday and they're actually making up for it today, and we don't know about that. So check your expectations of how much a portion size should be for them. And also remember that children are so different. My son and my daughter are polar opposites. My son has huge portions and my daughter has really mini ones. It's important that we realise that just as us as adults, we don't all have exactly the same appetite, and try and allow children to come back for seconds if we have more, and also not necessarily eat a whole meal that we have plated up for them. And that's perfectly normal. Another point to try and reiterate is avoiding that reward and punishment. So I know this is actually something that is happening quite a lot in nursery still, because I often have quite a lot of parents come to me saying that they're really not happy about it, which is that children are only allowed the puddings if they eat their whole main course. Now, the whole point in nursery of having a pudding is generally that it helps to add energy and add nutrients to a child's diet. So, for example, if they get an unfamiliar meal that they are not happy to accept, the pudding is there to make sure that that child can still top up on energy, can still get some nutrients in their diet. And especially, again, coming back to Zebedees, all of the desserts that are on the Zebedees menu are really nutritious. They tend to have vegetables included in them. They tend to have really, really healthy ingredients. So instead of saying you have to eat your main course to get your pudding, we ideally want to keep those on a level playing field. Not one is better than the other. They don't need to eat through one in order to get the reward at the end, because all we're doing is actually making that mealtime less appealing. What we want to do is try and put those on a level playing field, allow children to eat to appetite, and avoid rewarding or punishing for them eating. Because again, if we are giving them a reward for eating, we're not encouraging them to actually listen to their appetite. We're telling them that if you finish that meal that I've decided you should eat, you'll get a reward for that. So it's really important not to. And again, punishment. We don't want to say, if you don't eat this food, you will not get pudding, because we're just making it sound like that pudding is much, much better than it is. So I hope that kind of helps. And like I said, puddings are there for a really important reason at nursery, to give multiple opportunities for children to eat. So that if they skip lunch and they skipped breakfast, then there is still an option of them to have a nice, healthy, nutritious and energy-dense pudding. So I think I've got 2 more slides on this, but what affects appetite? Now, this is something as well that is really key, where we're talking about child autonomy. And the reason for this is that children's appetites are very fickle. They are affected by so much, including the weather, including how hot or cold they are, including whether they're unwell, whether they're teething, whether they've got a sore throat. They can't necessarily say to you, oh, I've got a bit of a sore throat, so I didn't want to eat that because it looks really scratchy. But that might be what they're thinking. But they can't articulate that to you. They can't communicate that to you. All they can do is say, no, I don't want it. And we as adults are thinking, oh, no, but they must be hungry. I must get them to eat this. But actually, their appetites are affected by so much. So it's really important that we realise that if they're overtired, have sore teeth, have a headache, they're just feeling a bit under the weather, if they're reaching new milestones and all of a sudden are walking, crawling or talking, all of these things and many, many, many more will affect children's appetites. It's why, I have an inbox full of parents saying to me that their little ones have gone off food because their appetites are quite naturally up and down, and we should expect this. So try not to worry if children aren't eating on one day. You can communicate that to parents so they can keep an eye on it a little bit at home, but there's no reason for us to worry too much because it's very normal for that to happen. So we want to try and look at these meal times and these environments as this more kind of holistic experience for children. So skill building, an enjoyable time, a bit like playtime, where they get lots of support, where they learn about the culture of food, where they understand the structure of food and meal times and how it fits into our lives. When they think about togetherness and eating together with their friends and family, and what a lovely occasion that can be, where they see lots of role modelling, especially from you as staff if possible. And again, one of the things to highlight as well is that Zebedees do offer an option of staff being able to buy meals for themselves. So if you have it in your budget, or if you're able to do that, you could always have one member of staff to have a Zebedees meal. We eat it here at Zebedees. Every time I come here, I get plated up a really delicious plate of whatever's on offer at the nursery that day. And I love it. And all of the staff at Zebedees take part in the meals too. So they are perfect for adults as well. So if you have the budget, if you're able to, see if you can get staff some meals as well. And you can all sit and eat the same food together, which will help as well. So those are some of the things that I like to think about meal times, to try and make it a little bit more positive and beneficial. So last but not least, I'm just going to do a bit of a summary around everything I covered. I know it was quite a lot, but first of all, children's nutrition really matters. Those early years, you know how important they are for learning and skill development and growth and development. But meal times are also really important for that too, as is nutrition for young children. Food environments at nursery can make such a difference. They can actually make your life easier. If those environments go smoothly and are fun and enjoyable, it's going to have a knock-on effect to how every single mealtime each day goes. Learning about food is a key part of a child's nursery experience. And getting kids involved in those meal times, skill building, learning about food, familiarising with food helps too. Keeping that language positive around meals. And I really would like to ask staff to all try and think about this and maybe put it into some kind of policy and have a conversation with all the rest of the staff. Because if one member of staff is saying they don't like food, or saying it doesn't smell very nice, or making a negative comment towards it, it's going to impact how the other children see that food. Avoid rewards and punishment for eating. I'm really trying and understand and then develop that autonomy in young children, because it will really see them better later on in life. Get involved in those mealtimes yourself. Be a part of them. Let them see you enjoying food too. And keep it really consistent. Once you feel like you've nailed that mealtime environment, try and be really consistent with it. So similar times, same chairs, environment, calm time, clear away, everything like that, because actually children really do like routine. So once you've established something that works really well, stick to it if you can. I really hope you found that helpful. Sorry, one more thing before I go. And I like to talk about this. I talked about this in the last presentation, but I think that if any of you are struggling with the kind of communication, or you're worried about parents and how parents are conveying things, I always say communication is really key. Maybe you can try and convey to a parent that you want this to be a bit more of a partnership. What's working at home? What's working at nursery? They might actually find it really beneficial to see if their little one isn't eating well at home, what you're trying to do at nursery to try and help them eat better, because they might actually really benefit from that. So offer lots of empathy, reassurance. There's plenty of places you can signpost them to, like my website. They can contact Zebedees directly if they are worried about anything. Offer plenty of support, and also there's lots of handouts, leaflets and signposting you can do for them. But think about it as this kind of collaborative thing to do together. And last but not least, how can Zebedees help? So I've already mentioned their adult meals. I genuinely do really believe that if members of staff can be sitting with the children and eating with them, and ideally eating similar meals, it will have a really positive impact. Remember that, they also have lots of different options for things like allergy, but actually they try and make them all very visually similar. So if you have cultural needs or allergy needs of some children, Zebedees try really hard to make sure that actually it's all visually similar, so children don't feel like they're missing out. They also offer advice on portioning, self-serving, and on role modelling. And we are going to move to a Q&A in a minute, and I'm going to invite Dawn to come along, who's from Client Services at Zebedees, and we're going to both together help to answer some of your questions. But for now, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I know there's a lot of information. You will be able to watch this back later and share it with anybody else who missed it. But I really, really hope you found that helpful. Thank you, and we're going to move on to Q&A now, so there'll be plenty of time for you to ask and us to answer questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. This is Dawn.
Hi.
For those of you, most of you probably know Dawn. You've probably met her multiple times, and Dawn's going to help me. So she's going to answer any that are very specific to Zebedees and the menus. So we've got one question here. If one child refuses to eat and it's causing a domino effect with the other children, what is the best way to handle this? That's a really tricky one. It really is quite hard, especially if you have got one child who's refusing. I would say that it's really important to try not to make a big deal out of the food refusal. You do want to give them that autonomy. And I use at home with my children the phrase, that's okay, you don't have to eat it, full stop. That's as much attention as I give to food refusal. Now, this isn't going to change overnight. You know, you won't find that tomorrow it's easy and that nobody's having this. But the main thing I would say is avoid drawing attention. It's like when children, you know, we're constantly saying, stop screaming, stop screaming. They don't stop screaming. They're more likely to stop screaming when you actually address it and say, I can hear that you're screaming. Do you want my attention? And I think it's a similar thing. Rather than saying, you've got to eat it, or putting loads and loads of attention on it, I would personally want to say, that's okay, you don't have to eat it, full stop, move on. And actually that helps to rein that pressure in, to rein that environment in, and hopefully you can focus a little bit more on some of the children who are eating well, and that can have a knock-on effect meal to meal. So a lot of those tips that I talked about, you know, improving the mealtime environment, but really not addressing that. But I empathise with you because it is really, really tricky. The other thing is if you can put them next to a child who is a really good eater and just naturally eats lots of food, and maybe put them with that child and maybe have other children who are a little bit more susceptible slightly further away, I think that might help too. We've got one here that says, if staff sit with children to eat as recommended, but have a different meal, their own packed lunch, is that still okay? So from my point of view, absolutely. That is definitely better than staff not sitting with children, because honestly, the staff are role models. They really are. And I know you might not feel like that, but you really are. They will pick up on what you say, what you do, and they will want to copy you. So the more that you can sit with them and eat with them, the better. Even if it's not the same food, yes. But obviously it's best if it is the same food, because there's a lot more kind of role modelling that can go on with the food. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do offer? Because I don't know the ins and outs of the adult meals that you offer.
Well, we can add you can always order an adult meal. So we can add something onto the ordering process so that you can press a button and order an adult portion size of that meal, or as many as you would like. So yeah, it's very easy to provide adult food, and we can provide dietary requirements for adults if they have any allergies as well. So yeah.
Amazing. That's really good. So you've got all the allergy options for adults as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, the meals, like I say, every time I come to Zebedees, I get the meals, and the Zebedees staff
we all
eat
eat them every day.
They are delicious. They are not, you know, what we might traditionally think of as kids' meals. They really are. They really are.
Really delicious.
So amazing, really great questions as well, and genuinely, I'm really impressed to see your questions because it shows that you really get it. And thank you. If children refuse to eat the lunch, would you recommend finding them an alternative, as we as a setting have a duty of care to the child to eat? So that is a great question. The main thing I would say is yes, you do have a duty of care to get children to eat, but you cannot force children to eat. With most settings, you are not going to have the ability, and actually it's one of the reasons why I often say to parents that there's better eating at nursery. You are not going to be able to offer an alternative to every single child because you will be doubling up your meal prices. It's not really something that is very practical. And also if one child says they want something else, then the next child does, then the next child does, then the next child does. You have to think that as a nursery setting, you are providing multiple opportunities for children to eat. So you've got, breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, puddings as well involved in that. And also you often have time in the day where they can have milk. So there are multiple opportunities for children to eat throughout the day. And it is one of the reasons why pudding is so beneficial to be offered at nursery. I would definitely not be recommending offering an alternative to that meal. If you then go and make toast for one child, you're going to be making toast for everybody else. It's not practical, it's not helpful, and we don't recommend parents or nursery staff to be offering alternatives because in the long run it really isn't helpful. And imagine what's going to happen tomorrow if you brought out toast for someone today. It's going to be a knock-on effect. And I totally appreciate you're saying you have a duty of care to feed them. You don't have a duty of care you are feeding them, you are producing their meal. If a child decides they don't want it, it might be for multiple reasons. Maybe they don't feel well. So is it our duty to then be forcing them or encouraging them to really eat something when they don't want it? It's a really tricky one, but it's definitely, you're providing food, you're offering them plenty of opportunities to eat. You don't need to be kind of forcing them to have something. But really great question. I hope that answers it.
That's perfect, yeah.
Okay, we've got some more coming in. I love it. I love a question. So, Ofsted like children to be independent. How do you manage portion control when children self-serve? Great question. I don't know, you might have... I'm happy to go, but you say if you've got anything to add.
I think if you've got a member of staff sitting around the table, then that offers the assistance in that department that you need because... I think that you just need an adult probably around the table.
Or pre-portion it.
I think most nurseries would put it in a container and put it in the centre of the table so that they can self-serve. Yeah. And the whole idea is that they get used to serving themselves and eating to their own appetite. So, but I think the main thing is probably to make sure there must be always a nursery staff anyway around that they are there so that if they are kind of going a little bit over the top with the portion sizes, they can kind of rein it in. Yeah. And then they get used to it as they do it. I mean, I went to a parents' evening last night and they've all started the self-serving system with the 3 and above, and they said it works amazingly well, and the children are loving getting involved in serving the food, walking along the line. And I said, does it make nursery meals last a lot longer? And she said, well, they've got so much better at it. Yeah. Because they're doing it every day. So the skills that are involved in serving their own food are invaluable, and especially when they then go on to school. So I think it's great if you can do it. It's not always easy to do, but I do think it's great. But and I think that the whole portions, I don't think that many of them are going to over portion. And if they do, if they're eating it, then and it's there, then that's good. And some people won't be eating that much.
You might be able to sort of, have kind of sections for them so they can serve themselves, but from a defined portion. Or, for example, a certain size spoon. So, if you're using a certain size spoon to kind of help them to have an idea of what that portion might be like. But honestly, it's so great that you're trying to do that. We really, really, really want to encourage self-serving as much as you can. And like you said, even if it's things like finger foods or part of the meal that you can put in the middle of the table and allow them to kind of help themselves do, that's all about developing independence as well. Yeah. But love that. Really great question. So someone said, we have a 1-year-old who refuses every Zebedees food possible. We've tried both purees and normal. What mum wants her to eat more and drink less formula, but the team is trying their best with this and they don't want their child to starve. Child eats at home fine, but at nursery is very fussy. How can we combat this? That's a really tricky one. Especially, obviously, with a 1-year-old, you wouldn't really want a 1-year-old to be having purees. You'd want them to be having the kind of main meal. It is really, really tricky if they aren't having any of the meals that are on offer at all. Definitely lots of communication with the parents. If you can bring the parents in, if you can have a chat with them about what works at their house, what is the environment like that they're eating at their house, what kind of foods is it they're eating at their house, not necessarily that you can change exactly what's on offer. Also, I know you mentioned about the formula. I wondered whether it is at nursery that they're having more formula than they would be having at home to compensate, because also what that's going to do is that's going to drive appetite right down. So if children are having lots of formula at nursery, it's going to mean that they have much less of an appetite for that meal. And I know it's a bit of a circle, isn't it? Because they're not eating the food, so you give them more formula, so they're not eating the food. And somewhere along the line, we need to try and break that cycle. But it's really, really tricky. And I mean, Zebedees, every time they send out a menu, they send out 2 surveys and they get feedback. And the feedback, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's so positive. It really, really is. And anywhere there are little bits, that it's addressed to make sure that we're basically aiming for like 100% of enjoyment, which is obviously very rare. But they do such a great job. So it's a really tricky one to say, because obviously the meals are generally enjoyed. Obviously this child is not used to, not familiar. I don't know how long they've been doing it for, but if you would like to, you can get in touch with Zebedees. Yeah. We can send you some thoughts, feedback that maybe even I've got a fact sheet that I could send that the parent could have. So much stuff we can do to help. But sometimes it's about consistency, persistence, definitely communication with the parent. But it's really tricky. And I can imagine that for you, this is a really, really tough thing to have to deal with. Yeah. So do get in touch and I'm sure we'll do our best to help you. But yeah, thank you for asking the question. Is it best to keep children of different age groups separate at mealtimes or mixed? Do they benefit from seeing how their older peers behave, or could this be detrimental? Yeah, I would say it would be great. Yeah. I would say it depends on the mealtime environment and what rooms and space you have. We don't want children to be cramped. We don't want to separate them necessarily from their friends. But definitely, I think that younger children seeing older children, role model, it makes a massive difference. Yeah. If you have the ability to have kind of shared mealtimes and the little ones eating with the older ones, I think that sounds brilliant to me. But if you don't worry about it either. But yeah, really great question as well. Yeah. Do you see that a lot in nurseries? Do you see them mixing, or what do they do?
We're not there at
when
lunchtime usually, because obviously that's time that they don't want us to be there. And I think they do have their separate rooms. But I do think it probably is quite a positive thing to do if you are able to do it.
Possible,
I think the older ones can help the younger ones as well. Yeah. So I think it's
definitely
a good thing to be able to do.
And the older children probably like the kind of the showing off and being the models as well, don't they? I bet they'll love that. So that is such a great question. Honestly, I'm loving these questions. Not all parents want their child to have the hot lunch. Some provide packed lunches, which means that not all children are eating similar looking meals. All children need to get their cooked for could be problematic. Any suggestions? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know some nurseries are always trying to move towards having more. Yeah,
it's tricky, and the best scenario would be that everyone was having a hot meal, but that's not always possible. And it's very difficult if they've got packed lunches and there's something desirable in that packed lunch box that the children that you're trying to eat a healthy meal has got. So it's a very difficult situation to navigate. And that's up to you as to whether you keep them separate or not. But obviously the ideal scenario is to everyone
to have it all similar.
And to not allow the children with packed lunches to have anything that's particularly unhealthy, sweet. Crisps and stuff, because obviously the children that you're trying to get to eat the healthy meals are going to want to veer towards those items. So I think it's fine to probably keep them together, as long as you have some sort of packed lunch policy.
Yeah, I think I was going to say something like a packed lunch policy can really help with that situation. And obviously, if you can get the children, I mean, one of the reasons why at Zebedees they have an allergy, different cultural menus, but they try and keep them so similar, is so that you don't have that problem of some children having something different to others. And again, like you say, I know that a lot of settings write in and try and move towards having a completely just Zebedees meals on the menu, but I know that's not going to be practical for everyone.
And there's a couple of case studies on our YouTube channel about how a couple of our nurseries did go from packed lunches to all school meals, and one of them went from about 15 hot lunches a day to about 75 now hot lunches a day. So and she does a great webinar on that. So it's well worth looking at our YouTube channel to see those.
I love that. But yeah, that's honestly such great questions. So thank you for asking that. We have some children with allergies that are very severe, so they need to sit separately at mealtimes. Any advice on how we can make them feel less different? Oh, that's really challenging. Again, I would definitely say, as much communication with the parents as you can. What do they do at home? How do they manage this at home when they're in a setting where maybe there is exposure to other allergens, potentially, but maybe there isn't? The other thing I would say is if a member of staff can sit with the little one, that's the main thing I would say. If they can sit with them and be, give them that kind of engagement as much as you can. And also, Zebedees do so much information on allergens, and if there are any meals that can be shared together, I would try and encourage that as much as you can, but obviously easier said than done. Really tricky one. Allergies is a minefield, isn't it? So, but really great questions. Thank you so much. Just check the chat box. We often, if a child refuses not to eat tea, we offer them fruit rather than the second course if it's a cake or flapjack. So I would say that what that's doing is that suggesting that the cake is a treat and the fruit is not. So what you're almost doing is saying to children, if you don't eat your dinner, you get fruit. That's punishment. If you do eat your dinner, you get this, which is a treat. So not only are you trying to encourage them not necessarily to eat to appetite, but to eat their food regardless of how they feel, but you're also saying to them, but actually fruit's bad and these cakes are good. So for me, I wouldn't be doing that. I would, like I say, at Zebedees, especially if you're on the Zebedees, their food is normally got vegetables in it. It's got carbohydrates, the proteins.
Cakes have all got fruit, vegetables in. They've got eggs in them in the cakes. So they're nutritional anyway, without lots of refined sugar. So it is a healthy option, and it will fill them up. So and oats,
And in the cakes, they'll be getting a much more balance of nutrients than just in fruit. I'm not saying fruit's bad, fruit's brilliant. But if you are offering them the cakes that are on offer, they will, like you said, be getting eggs, carbohydrates, veggies or fruit, energy, dairy, which is what you want them to be having. So I actually think, the other way round would be, preferred. So I totally understand what you're doing, and we've all been brought up in generations where we do kind of say, you're not allowed this or you must finish your plate. I was brought up like it is so normal, but actually what we're doing is we are saying that the food and the fruit isn't good, and we're almost punishing with fruit, which might end up with children actually not wanting fruit anymore because they're thinking that is a punishment. So I try and refrain from that as much as you can, but I totally understand where it's come from and what the thinking behind it. So there's one more come through, hold on. So what should a nursery practice before children sitting down to eat? As always, wash their hands for hygiene. Is anything else good to do for routine? Oh, I love this question because I love talking about this. So loads of things you can do. Try and work out what works for your nursery and what seems to fit in with your environment, but definitely clear away. So I love the fact that they do that because I think it really helps to show mealtime is different, mealtime separate, mealtime's important. It gets rid of the distractions. It also gives children that independence and autonomy. They're clearing things away because I'd really like to see mine do that more at home.
So would I.
So definitely doing that. Hand washing, practice hygiene. And also I love it when you give them roles. So someone's handing out the plates, someone's handing out the knives and forks, someone's standing and being the server, or, as we said, children serving themselves. Anything that you can do to get them involved. If you can give them, one of them a little apron and they're the little snack helper of that day, all of those kind of things help to make that mealtime environment much more enjoyable. An experience rather than just, right, sit down, we're all eating now. Everyone be quiet, an experience. And that's what I like to think. But great question again. So thank you. I think we've answered loads. Anything else you want to add? Or
No, but only that, if you need any help, myself, Alistair and Louise, your client relations, and we can always come to your setting and we can offer any advice, or on the end of the phone. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really hope you found it helpful. You can definitely watch it back. And as always, Zebedees, we're always here to answer questions or offer you any more. So thank you for joining in. Really hoped it was successful. And I'm sure we'll do another one soon. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much for attending that webinar. I hope you found it helpful. And I hope you took home some tips around making that mealtime environment an enjoyable place for young children. Of course, if you've got any questions, please contact us at Zebedees.